Hey guys, so this is the third video in the tutorial series, and in this video, like I said, we're going to start our first animation. It's actually a very small animation, only 5 seconds long. A very simple thing, just a cube and a floor. And so I'll just play the animation here. As you can see, just the cube, it's moving across the floor. We have a couple of lights, some blue light, red light, and some basic shaders applied on here. So we're going to be creating this animation today, and it's actually going to be split into two videos. The first video, I'm going to create this scene, the floor, the cube, and just talk about how to animate this object. And in the next video, we're going to look at about the shading, the different basic shaders that are given to both these objects, and the lighting setup and how to render this video. It's actually a very easy animation. If you get used to Blender, it'll take 5 minutes tops 5 minutes to finish the animation, to create it actually. But since I have to teach you guys all the shortcut keys, it's going to take some time, and that's why I split it up into two videos. So let's get started right away. Let's jump into Blender. So here I have a new file, Blender file, and I'm going to start off by deleting everything that the file comes with. So just hit A. It's going to select all our objects and hit delete. Now all of our objects are gone. Now I want to add in my floor. Now to add objects in Blender, there are two ways. One, you can go up here to add and click on this and you get the add menu, or you can use shortcut key Shift A. If you use Shift A, you'll see under mesh we have these different types of meshes. Now these are basically like fundamental meshes that you have to use in order to make any object or model in Blender. All models are based off of these meshes here, and for our floor, it's mostly signifies a plane, so we're just going to use a plane. So I've added a plane. One second, let me just turn on my screencast keys. Okay, so now you guys can see what I'm doing down here. Now I added my plane in. Now before we get to actually the animating part and creating the cube, I'm going to talk about basically like three operations that you would use in Blender no matter what. Whatever you do, you're going to use these three operations, and it's vital that you learn the shortcut keys. Basically, those three operations would be moving an object, scaling an object, and rotating an object. So for moving an object, you press the letter G, and you can move it now across the 3D space. But say you want to move across a specific axis, say I want to move across x-axis or y-axis, then you just press the letter X. So for G on the x-axis, I just press G, X. Across the y-axis means Y, and now it's moving across the y-axis. Z means across the z-axis, and you would left click to confirm your position. Now let me just undo this. If I didn't want to confirm my position, say for example I accidentally clicked the letter G and I don't want to move this object, then just right click, it'll snap back to its original position. So that's for moving an object. And then for rotating an object, it's R. And as you can see here, we're rotating across all the axes. I usually don't find this useful. I've never had to rotate an object across all of its axes. I usually only rotate across like a specific axis, such as x-axis or y-axis and z-axis. And the way I'm doing this is the same thing I did for moving. I'm just pressing the respective letter for that axis. So the z-axis means I press the Z key, the y-axis means the Y key, and the x-axis means the X key. And you just the same thing, left click to confirm your position, and right click to cancel it. I'm just going to undo that. Now for scaling, it's the same thing except the shortcut key is S. Now you can scale across all the axes, which is like this: X, Y, and Z. Now the thing to keep in mind here, a plane cannot be scaled across the Z axis. That's because a plane is a 2D object and cannot have depth. So in this case, scaling across the Z axis does absolutely nothing. Now while I'm here in the scaling mode, you notice down here at the bottom of the screen, I can't bring my cursor there, but at the bottom of the screen there is various different shortcut keys such as X, X-axis, Y, Y-axis, Z, Z-axis. So if you do forget the shortcut key, you can just look down there and Blender will display all the different like options available for each tool. So let me just leave out of this by right clicking. Now say I want to rotate my object. As soon as I press R, you notice all those options come down there. So those are just basically pointers telling you the various different shortcut keys for the different types of options you want to select. So now that I got that out of the way, let's make our flow a little bigger. So I have to scale it up basically. So I'm going to hit S and scaling across both X and Y axis. Since Z axis won't be affected here, I'm going to make it about this big. Zoom out a little bit here, And okay, so that's good. Now I have to add my cube in. So again, Shift A, Mesh, Cube. Now I have a problem. My cube is in the floor, so I have to lift it up. You can just lift the cube up by pressing G, Z, and just eyeball the location correctly, but you're never going to get it exactly on the floor. There is going to be some gap always. So in order to get that cube perfectly on the floor, this is where orthographic view comes in use. Now you see, this floor is just a plane, it doesn't have any depth. So it's sitting perfectly on an axis, it's sitting perfectly on this X and Y plane. So no matter what, that is just going to be a straight line in orthographic view, and we can easily align a cube to that line. So for that, just go into any of your views, such as side view or your front view. So we're going to go into our front view here, zoom in a lot, and you notice here that a cube is floating above that line. So this line is basically the x-axis, but keep in mind that our plane is actually sitting just on that line. So if you bring our cube down to that line, our cube will be perfectly sitting on that floor or plane. So I'm going to hit G and bring it out on the z-axis so that it's just on that line, and that's good. So now if I just use my middle mouse button to move out of this view, you'll notice that the cube is now sitting perfectly flush with the floor. Now it's okay if the cube goes a little bit underneath the floor, as long as it's not floating above the floor. If it's floating, it will cast a shadow and it won't look natural, it will look awkward. It's okay if it's a little bit inside of the floor. So now our scene is set up. We have to animate the cube now. So for animating, we come down here to the timeline. So I'm just going to increase the size of my timeline here. And as you can see here, our animation starts on frame 1 and ends on frame 250. That's approximately 10.2 seconds of animation if I'm doing a 24 frames per second render, which is just too long. I want to be a 5-second animation. So I'm going to bring this down to 120. So now we have exactly have 120 frames, which is exactly 5 seconds. So now animating in Blender is done using keyframes. Keyframes basically tell Blender at a particular frame the location of an object or the properties of an object. So we're basically telling Blender, on the first frame, I want my cube to be here. And then on the last frame, I want my cube to be here. And what Blender will do is, for each and every frame in between those two keyframes, it will calculate the position of the cube. So basically all you have to do is define the starting point of your move and the ending point of your move, and Blender will will calculate the position of the cube following the shortest path. Keep that in mind, the shortest path between the two positions of the object. So say my cube is here. At the end of the animation, I want it to be here. So for that, I need two keyframes. I need the starting position, I need the final position. So the starting position, I'm going to add a keyframe here. That's done by pressing I on the keyboard, and you have this insert keyframe menu. And in that, since I'm only changing the location of the object, I want to add a location keyframe. So once that's done, you notice some changes. Here there's a yellow dot, and these values are now become yellow. This yellow value signify that the keyframe exists on this frame, and this yellow dot basically is just the keyframe. Now, if you were to right click outside of the anywhere in this timeline right here, that will become white dot. So basically the yellow signifies that that keyframe is selected, and actually the white dot signifies the existence of a keyframe. So I'm just going to select a cube again, and now I want to go to our last frame, which is frame number 120. So now I'm on my frame number last frame. I want my cube to be here. So I'm just going to move it on the y-axis, G, Y, and around here. So now I have the position of the cube ready for the 120th frame. Now if I have to add a keyframe, but one thing to keep in mind is, if you change your frame here by accident, the cube will reset back to its default position, and in this case default means the location of that the previous keyframe, the location defined by the previous keyframe. So now say if I go to if I accidentally click here, you notice that the cube will default back to its original position defined by this keyframe. So you have to make sure that you don't accidentally move your position in your timeline while you're adding keyframes. So now I want my cube to be here. I'm going to hit I, and I'm going to add a location keyframe since I'm changing the location of the cube. And we have another yellow dot. And you notice here, these values have also become yellow, signifying that there exists a keyframe on the 120th frame. So I'm going to jump to the beginning of the animation now and play it back. So that'd be shift space to play the animation. And you notice our cube is moving from the starting point to its ending point. Wonderful. Now we have to bring a camera into the scene so that we can render the scene, and we have to animate the camera so that it follows this cube. So I'm just going to jump back to my starting frame here by shift left arrow. So I'm at the starting frame of the animation. I'm going to go shift A and then come down here to camera. So now I've added a camera into the scene, and it'll be here underneath the floor. So I want it to be around, let's say around here. So for that, I'm just going to move my camera up, G on the Z axis. Bring it back a little bit, G on the X axis, and here. And now my camera's here. I just want to bring it actually a little bit up more and more a little bit forward. Okay, so now to adjust the view of the camera, I have to go into the camera view. So I press 0 on the number pad. I go into the camera view. And first of all, I notice two things. One, that there's this yellow line right here, and you can see at the edge there a dotted line. This yellow line basically signifies that the camera is currently selected. So if I select this cube here, it will disappear. Now the dotted line is very important actually. The dotted line represents what area will be rendered and what area will actually see in the final render. So anything inside of these dotted line, this dotted rectangle, will be rendered. Anything outside will not be rendered. That's just there. This outside is just there so that you can find a place in the scene if you're in the camera view. So now I want to select my camera again. So just click here on the dotted line, select the camera. It's because it has a yellow outline, and now I have to rotate it up on my rotate a little bit here like this, and rotate Y, and then fix that by rotating again on the X axis. Now I have to move my camera up here a little bit. Okay. And now we have our initial position of the camera set. So I want to keyframe this. I just hit I and I hit rotation, because in this case we're only changing the rotation of the camera. The camera is not actually moving to follow the cube. It's just rotating to follow the cube. So I add a rotation keyframe. Now I want to jump to the last frame in my animation, 120th frame, and now I have to move my camera so that's facing the cube. So I'm going to rotate across the Z axis. And if you do get this jerkiness as you saw right there, just come out of your camera view, like press 0, come out of the camera view, do the same operation, like rotate on Z axis again, and this time it will become smooth. That is a mistake I do notice here and there. It sometimes gets finicky. So just leave the camera view, rotate your object, or change the position of your object, whatever you do, and then go back into the camera view. Now I have to bring it back a little bit actually, and then I have to move it up on the X axis and a little bit on the Y axis. So I'm going to keyframe this position because this is the final position of my camera, and there I added a rotation keyframe this time because I'm only changed the rotation of the camera, nothing else. So now if you go to the beginning of the animation and we play this back, you'll notice that the camera follows the cube perfectly. So this is basically how we animate any object in Blender, including the camera. We use these keyframes, and I just want you guys to play around with different types of keyframes available. Like there are location, rotation, and scaling. These are the main three ones, and there's also a combination of them. Like for example, if I want to keyframe both the location and rotation of my cube at the same time, I can do that directly in one keyframe rather than adding two separate keyframes. So just play around with your different keyframes and figure it out. Actually, trial and error is the best way to learn things. So just try different keyframes, try different camera moves. Most importantly, just don't animate your objects, because you may think right away, okay, I've animated my object, my scene will look good. That's actually not correct. Your scene, how good your scene looks largely depends on the animation of your camera. The better you animate the movement of your camera, the better your graphics will look, and the more realistic your graphics may look. So that's all for this video. In our next video, we're going to look at how I'm going to give shading to these two objects, the floor and our cube, and the basic lighting setup and how I'm going to render that. So until next time, bye guys.